David again seems to not understand this idea of changing a verse. If you are in a pre-printing press world and not everyone has a copy of the Bible, yes, if you as a preacher or if you're a Jew in Medina and you have the scrolls of the Old Testament or the Torah and you make changes to that, that does change the scripture. And that's why there are so many versions of the Torah. When we look at the manuscript copies of the Dead Sea Scrolls and we compare it to the Masoretic text, we compare it to the Samaritan text, we compare it to the Septuagint. That's why there are variances, because this happened historically. So now let's get out of the mindset of the Islamic dilemma and get to the real world, the world of academia, where they do study these texts. They do look at all of these manuscripts that have been found through archaeology, all these parchments, and we do see corruption. We do see differences in what has been written. And that happens because there's no cross-referencing. They can't go on Skype and in Constantinople, Christians in Constantinople call the Christians in Greece and say, hey, I'm going to make this update to this verse because of whatever reason. They don't do that. There's no technology. They do it privately, and then those manuscripts get buried, and then they're discovered 2,000 years later, 1,500 years later, and lo and behold, there are all these discrepancies. That's what the actual scholarship has established.
He says that there are textual variants in the Torah. Yeah, that happens when people copy books by hand. There are textual variants in the manuscripts of the Quran, tens of thousands of textual variants. Uthman had to burn piles of them. I still think we know what the Quran is, and if I were to say, I affirm the inspiration, preservation, and authority of the Quran, we would kind of know what I'm talking about in spite of textual variants. And on the issue, it's an interesting point about oral transmission and so on, because they tried to preserve the Quran orally, and it didn't work. And the reason for writing the Quran as a book was because they kept losing more and more of it. But then, if you talk about hadith preservation, where they're passing on stories for decade after decade after decade, I think we can see why Yasser Qadi claimed that the hadith methodology cannot stand up to academic scrutiny. So, good points, Daniel.